Now, seeing those videos certainly had me a little bit outraged. But I have to put that aside. I'm not going to be a Ron Paul supporter because I'm pissed off the media. To be honest, back then he did look like a, small-time candidate, and they were just looking for ratings, and, that's what they do. What drives me is Ron Paul's unerring integrity, his honesty. I mean, you always know where he stands on an issue. He doesn't dodge questions. For the past 30 years, he's been saying the exact same thing. Non-interventionist foreign policy. Lower taxes, lower spending. Peace and prosperity, they go hand in hand. Countries fall. They destroy themselves when their governments can't maintain the basic infrastructure of the nation. Right now, we're going bankrupt. The dollar has lost 10% of its value against the euro in the past year alone. We have to borrow billions of dollars overseas simply to keep our current lifestyle as it is. It's because we're spending too much money. Over $1 trillion in Iraq already. What would we have done with that money at home? I mean, look at our current housing market crisis or the recent NASDAQ stock market crash. I mean, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to read you an exact passage from Dr. Paul and where he stands on it straight from his website. He says, "Working Americans like lower taxes. So do I. Lower taxes benefit all of us, creating jobs and allowing us to make more decisions for ourselves about our lives. Whether a tax cut reduces a single mother's payroll taxes by $40 a month or allows a business owner to save thousands in capital gains taxes and hire more employees, that tax cut is a good thing. Lower taxes allow more spending, saving, and investing, which helps the economy. That means all of us. Real conservatives have always supported low taxes and low spending, but today too many politicians and lobbyists are spending America into ruin. We are $9 trillion in debt as a nation. Our mounting government debt endangers the financial future of our children and grandchildren. If we don't cut spending now, higher taxes and economic disaster will be in their future, and in yours. In addition, the Federal Reserve, our central bank, fosters runaway debt by increasing the money supply, making each dollar in your pocket worth less. The Fed is a private bank run by unelected officials who are not required to be open or accountable to we the people. Worse, our economy and our very independence as a nation are increasingly in the hands of foreign governments such as China and Saudi Arabia, because the central banks also finance our runaway spending. We cannot continue to allow private banks, wasteful agencies, lobbyists, corporations on welfare, and governments collecting foreign aid to dictate the size of our ballooning budget. We need a new method to prioritize our spending. It's called the Constitution of the United States. Now, Dr. Paul advocates a low-tax, low-spending fiscal policy. That means you get to spend more of your money as you see fit. Not the government, not the lobbyists. You. Think about it. Check for yourselves. Take an economics class if you haven't already. I strongly encourage you to look into the country's current state of financial affairs. You may be surprised by what you see. Excuse me. I was reading an article by Georgia Jean, who was writing in response to an editorial made about Ron Paul. Within this article, he comments about a few of the proposed fiscal policies. On the issue of taxation, and in particular on the income tax, he writes, "I admit on first glance this seems far-fetched, but consider 2007's federal budget was $2.5 trillion, and nearly $1.2 trillion of that is derived from individual income tax revenue. That means about $1.3 trillion is collected by the federal government from other sources. In 1995, do you want to know how much the total federal budget was? You guessed it, $1.3 trillion. So for the same level of government we had 12 years ago, and I don't know about you, but it suited me just fine, we would not need income taxes. Now for me, I'm looking at the broader perspective. In just 12 years, our federal budget has doubled. Does this seem strange to anyone else? Does it seem like we need twice as much government as we did 12 years ago? Jean then follows up on the idea of the gold standard in the Federal Reserve. He says, the criticisms of our monetary policy have much less to do with conspiracy theories than with protecting the middle class and the poor. The fact is, since the Federal Reserve was created, the US dollar has lost 93% of its purchasing power due to massive inflation. However, if our monetary system was based on gold and silver, the trend would have been averted and staple goods would be much more affordable. For example, in 1970, silver was $1.64 an ounce. Gas was 36 cents a gallon. That means an ounce of silver could buy you almost 5 gallons of gas. Today, gas is about $3 a gallon. But now, an ounce of silver sells for about $14.50, equivalent to almost 5 gallons of gas. You guessed it, if the US dollar were still based on silver, gas would still be the equivalent of what it was in 1970. This is why Ron Paul supporters heed his warnings about the Federal Reserve, for the good of ordinary consumers. Again, this is the basis for our economic troubles in this nation. This is what we have to look at before we continue to fund a welfare state at home and a warfare state abroad. To conclude, I beg you to look into our current fiscal policies. It's a critical issue that no one else will talk about. Dr. Paul is courageous enough to point out the flaws in our current system so we can no longer ignore the issues that could serve to be our economic downfall. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to leave you with words from the man himself. Dr. Paul says, each of us should choose the course of action we must take. Education, conventional political action, or even peaceful civil disobedience to bring about necessary changes. But let it not be said that we did nothing. Thank you.